What is going on, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Studs and Duds. You know what? I'm going to skip the copy pasta intro just for this one. This series definitely has a lot of returning customers. If you are new, welcome in. Happy to have you. If you start watching, you like what you're hearing, but you have no idea what the hell is going on, just go check out one of our last couple of episodes of Studs and Duds. You'll get a little bit better feel for the program and what we're really doing here. But with that, let's get started talking about the rising and falling players around the AFC North today. We are going to start with the Cincinnati Bengals and their super stud, essentially the highlight player, the high rising player worth talking about the most. It was a tough choice for these Bengals, but gotta give Ja'Marr Chase his love. A +3 in the ratings, 93 to a 96. Look, we all knew and always have known that Ja'Marr Chase is a special talent. One of the best receivers to ever come out of college and has always passed the eye test on the NFL field. But actually, when you look back at his overall production and just how far up these sort of tiers in the NFL ladder of elite wide receivers, just how far he has climbed, he had yet to really check off the production box to be up there with your Justin Jeffersons, his college teammate, those great Tyreek Hill seasons, the great Devontae Adams seasons, even what someone like A.J. Brown had done over the last couple of years. He hadn't quite put it all together to be quite that dude. I would say this year, winning the Triple Crown, winning many people, myself included, their fair share of fantasy football leagues this year, he has arrived on your sort of modern day Mount Rushmore of wide receivers. Just an absurd player in terms of production, but obviously the film as well. His ability to separate to all three levels, to win spectacular catches, the chemistry he has with Joe Burrow when he gets in a pinch, to find him in scramble drill, to hit that back shoulder connection. It's all there. Absurd run after catch ability as well. He is a legitimate kind of speed train running back-esque rack threat as a wide receiver. I mean, if you're watching a series like this, you don't really need me to tell you how good Ja'Marr Chase is. This is really just a final celebration of the season he had and really planting his flag deeply inside that top tier of NFL wide receivers. I will say there's one last little hurdle that I want to see him clear. Not that it's obviously holding him back or anything like that, but some people might say, why doesn't he get into the TFG 99 club? Well, he was tied for third in the NFL in drops. He was 12th in drop rate, and he was actually pretty low on contested catch win percentage, 35th out of 43rd. Now, a lot of those were very high difficulty looks because Joe Burrow counts on him so much in a pinch. But I would say those are two areas of his game, kind of both ball skills related, that are very good, but there is some knocks in terms of, are they elite? Just that one department in his game. But hate to end it on any sort of a negative note. This has been a phenomenal season for Ja'Marr Chase, and also a credit to him for playing it out. Like, the Bengals, shame on them for not having the money to pay him before the season started, but he wanted to be there for his good friend Joe Burrow, for his teammates, and honestly made himself even more money because, like I said, he hadn't quite had that monster season. If the Bengals would have paid him before, probably could have gotten him a few mil per year less than they're going to have to pay him now. But the next player we're going to talk about is Joe Burrow, who had obviously a fantastic season pairing with your Triple Crown winner. Some very stupid, illogical conversations going on out there on the internet about if Joe Burrow is an elite quarterback. I mean, look, I like to give you guys watching a series like this a ton of credit. I would bargain that 99% of you all agree Joe Burrow is an elite quarterback and was before the year, and this year, raised the stakes even more. Kind of knock on wood, but kind of made us forget about a couple years where he had a hard time staying healthy, but just kind of continuing to put it all together, becoming more consistent, more dominant. I would argue sees the game as well, if not better than any quarterback in the league right now in terms of good processing, but throwing the ball with anticipation, getting the ball into those zone windows even before his receivers begin his breaks. but just remarkably accurate. Maybe one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. Was fun to see him tear it up at the Pro Bowl in those accuracy mini games that they do. It's one of my favorite things to watch, Pro Bowl weekend, and he hit every single target on the field. A guy that is often criticized for not having the strongest arm. Honestly, if you watch the film, I actually think he improved his ball velocity this year, which is possible to do, especially for a guy that is a bit of a lankier quarterback. If he really puts in the time in the weight room and through pliability training as he has, it is possible to increase that torque and increase the spin on the ball and get a little bit more velocity. I think you watch his deep balls and some of his throws on the run, the arm strength is not a concern on Joe Burrow at all. And then you get into his pocket presence, the ability to manipulate pressure and extend plays when his team needs him. Some of the just absurd plays he made this year, breaking sacks, throwing touchdowns, falling to the ground. He's in that elite tier, no doubt. Just a shame that he didn't have a defense this year. So +2 for Joe Burrow, up to a 94. And then Chase Brown, another kind of super stud candidate, to be honest. I just wanted to highlight Jamar Chase because all the things we said, kind of supplanting himself in that elite tier. But Chase Brown, very worthy of that as well. He's had an excellent season, getting +9 in the ratings throughout the year, +6 here for the second half of the season. Just literally bursting onto the scene. Emphasis on that word burst. He's a guy that doesn't always have the most consistent vision and doesn't always hit the right hole, but I do think he's improved his vision enough that he's hitting the right hole more often than not. And when he does hit the right hole, his burst, his acceleration, that 0 to 60 speed that he has is so special. And he puts it to good use in the receiving game as well. He didn't quite clear 1,000 rushing yards. I think he finished just short. He, of course, had that unfortunate injury week 17, was it, where he stops himself short of the goal line, rolls himself up like a pretzel, misses week 18. He almost certainly would have gotten that 1,000-yard mark. But he did have over 1,000 total yards because he was a consistent threat in the receiving game. But they tried to start Zach Moss to start the year. They said, he's the guy with the power and the vision. But even when Zach Moss got hurt, the Bengals still second-guessed this starting Chase Brown idea by going to get Khalil Herbert. And Chase Brown said, "Would you idiots stop trying to replace me? I'm right here." And Khalil Herbert became an afterthought, never really was able to become a presence in that backfield. Chase Brown really took it and literally ran with it. Should be a fantasy football darling next year. Shouldn't have any questions, really, if this guy can be a 3-down back for them. Yeah, you might want a guy for a 3rd and 1, have-to-have-it situation that's a little bit more reliable, a little bit more powerful. But you know who he actually reminds me of is James Cook in Buffalo, where he had some vision questions in college, but the more and more he got used, talking about James Cook here, the better his vision and patience and, frankly, contact balance got as well. So who's to say that can't happen with Chase Brown? Not a perfect parallel. Chase Brown also had probably 3 times the carries and opportunities to develop in college than a guy like Cook did in college. But either way you slice it, feel pretty good about saying Chase Brown is going to be the Bengals feature back next season. Then we got T. Higgins, is going to get a +1. You just wish he could stay healthy, but I do think when he played this year, he was as efficient as he's ever been, as really explosive as he's ever been. Obviously playing for a contract either here in Cincinnati or what could very well be a massive bag in free agency. I think he just checked a lot of boxes that you might have questioned on him coming into the year. He has a career high in missed tackles forced. He actually had more of those this year than he did the last 2 years combined, 16 this year. Really did a good job kind of setting himself up after the catch to get a little bit more meat off the bones on his receptions. He also had a career high in lowest, drop rate, just 2 drops on the season for a drop rate of 2.7%. He had been over 7% on his career with just 1 season under 5%. So he cuts his best season and drop rate in half. And then you go back to last year, He actually had a lot of opportunities to make big catches that he didn't come down with. He was only at 35% on contested catch win rate. You talk about T. Higgins being this jump ball 50-50 guy. You want to see that contested catch percentage skyrocket back up to 50%. And he got it up to 47% this year. That'll play. So really did, I think, bet on himself. Played quite possibly by the tape his best ball on the franchise tag this year. Really makes you wonder why Cincinnati wouldn't just pay him coming off a down year last year when his price would have been a little bit cheaper. It's just remarkable what having an owner that has cash on hand will do, because you look at these great teams that dish out these contracts with, voided years, and the way these teams can manipulate the cap. You can only do that if you have cash on hand, and unfortunately, the Bengals ownership just doesn't have that, and that's why they aren't able to pay these guys in a Trey Hendrickson. Like, seriously, you compare just having to pay 4 players in Cincinnati. They had to let Jesse Bates go as well. Compare that to, like, the Eagles that are able to pay everybody. The Niners that, for the most part have been able to pay everybody. The Chiefs have mostly been able to pay everybody. It's just pretty eye-opening what having that cash on hand in your ownership really means. And it's just a tragedy for Joe Burrow and Bengals fans. This shouldn't be as hard as it is, but obviously going to be a very fascinating free agent to follow. T. Higgins, probably going to be the highest paid free agent, assuming Cincy lets him out of the building. And then going to give some love to Mike Gesicki as well. A really nice season for Gesicki, kind of a bounce back year. 65 catches, 665 yards. A lot of these kind of crunch time, third down conversion catches. He had some big moments, a career high in contested catch win rate at 57%. With teams focusing on T and Chase, Burrow does sometimes need to just find a big target that can move the sticks and keep drives alive. And Gesicki was a really good fit in that way. And they run an offense that isn't afraid to have a tight end that basically isn't a tight end. He had a remarkable lack of snaps at tight end. I think he played 95% of his snaps as a wide receiver, either in the slot or out wide. So hard to even really call him a tight end at this point, but that is his positional listing. But yeah, good year for Mike Gesicki. I expect he will probably be back on a nice kind of team-friendly deal because it's a nice fit for him on the back end of his career. And then onto the offensive line, I thought Amarius Mims did settle in the second half of the year. I actually reduced him by 2 ratings points, with him really kind of struggling in his first 4 or 5 starts. Just had some of those really ugly losses. I would say those kind of disappeared as the season went on. He still took his losses. He's far from established as a superstar quite yet, but I do think he's settled in, and you feel pretty good about him as your right tackle. I was a big Amarius Mims fan, so I was a little scared off the jump, but he's a freaking monster out there, and ended up having a pretty damn solid rookie year in terms of pass blocking rate and some of the nice run blocks he had to spring some of these big runs open for Chase Brown in the second half of the year, especially too. So getting one of those 2 ratings points back, and then unfortunately Alex Kappa. I don't know if his contract ends. I know they signed him a couple years ago, but if not, he's definitely a cut candidate. I mean, he led all interior offensive linemen in pressures this year. Really, really a bad year. Turned 30 this season. Kind of a non-factor in the run game as well. He's never been a great run blocker. He served his purpose as a kind of Band-Aid veteran signing at guard, but he was probably the worst player on that offense this year. So we'll keep an eye on what they decide to do with Kappa. But let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball. For how bad this defense was, ultimately leads to the firing of Lou Anarumo, their defensive coordinator. For how bad the defense was, I don't have a ton to say about these guys. Really, what you feel with the defense is just the lack of guys stepping up. They have all these young players, these highly drafted guys that they're hoping to kind of take a leap, and none of these guys have really been draft hits. So you really just end up with a bunch of lowly rated talent that aren't necessarily underachieving based on where we have them rated, but it's that lack of growth with the defense that you really felt with this team and their struggles on defense, if that makes sense. But there was one player that really stepped up, and that is Trey Hendrickson, getting up into the 90s with the ratings now, with another monster, dare I say, defensive player of the year candidate type of season. His production really is as good as anybody over the last 2 years. If the Bengals defense was worth a damn, I think Trey Hendrickson probably would win that award. He led the NFL in sacks and was tied with Myles Garrett in pressures. The teams of both those players, Garrett and Hendrickson, having such garbage defenses this year is going to open the door for someone like Pat Surtain to probably win the award. But in a normal season, when it's the D linemen are typically going to get the nod, I mean, this was another defensive player of the year caliber season for Hendrickson. Just a man on a mission. Another one of these guys that it's like, how does this dude not have a contract extension from the Bengals? It just is head-scratching. He's going to be a pending free agent as well. It's just a true nightmare in Cincinnati. When you're talking about this being the one player in this defense that just continues to improve and really transcend expectations. But other than that, I mean, I'm going to lower Sam Hubbard a little bit. He's still a good run defender, so that's going to show up for him. But, dude, his pass rushing productivity was already very bland. But he used to at least kind of clear that threshold that you look for in a starting edge rusher, where he would at least get you about a 10% pressure rate, maybe 6 or 7 sacks on a season. Kind of that Andy Dalton line of starting edge rushers in the league. He's fallen beyond that really over the last 2 years, but especially this year in his pass rushing ability. I mean, Jesus, man, he had 18 pressures on 253 pass rush snaps. Just 2 sacks on the season. He's not getting you anything as a pass rusher. Teams were able to just leave him on an island, slide towards Trey Hendrickson, and obviously the interior wasn't giving this defense much either. That was the biggest problem that this defense had, and I do wonder kind of where his future lies with this Bengals team at this point, because they're paying him a little bit too much to just be an early down run defending edge, I think. And then, unfortunately, the Sheldon Rankins signing, I'm not going to lower him because he just barely played, right? It was like 6 games for Rankins. It's just hard to know, necessarily how much that was impeding his production on the field. But he is getting up there in age. Definitely going to be someone to keep an eye on this offseason if they want to keep him. I don't know necessarily if they can get out of that deal or not. They would just paid him this last offseason, obviously. But into next year, I mean, they have got to get more from him. He was one of the selling points on letting DJ Reader go, was that you were going to get more of a 3-down presence. Someone that did have a good year last year in Houston, but that guy was just nowhere to be found. Struggled as a run defender. He's always been a very streaky run defender. But holy shit, man, 4 pressures on 160 pass rush snaps, that's just non-existent. You or I might be able to luck into 2 pressures if the quarterback stepped up towards us with that many pass rush snaps. So I just can't explain it. I didn't feel like touching him because it was so bad. I feel like injuries had to explain that. But it was worth just having that conversation of just how big of a bust this free agent signing was this year for the Bengals. But let's move on to our next team. We're going to stick in the state of Ohio with the Cleveland Browns. A lot of players going down with Cleveland as it really is feeling more and more like they are going to try to get up and out from the Deshaun Watson contract and kind of go with the full rebuild approach here. We'll see how this Myles Garrett situation plays out. But we will start on a positive note with one player that did definitely have a standout season. It's not the most exciting discussion, but this was really a tough player to find a super stud for the Browns. Not a ton of high risers in terms of the ratings, but anyway, it's Isaiah McGuire, edge defender. You could call him an edge rusher. He had some decent moments as a pass rusher this year, showing at 270 pounds he can push the pocket and do some fun stuff. He has usefulness on 3rd down. Not ideal in terms of win rate and pressure rate and all that stuff. Still someone that I think ideally will be your 3, but at that size, what he did to smash blockers and stunt the run game was really, really impressive. He really emerged as one of the more stout, disciplined, powerful run defenders in the league at this edge position this season. So someone that can definitely be a, kind of piece in this culture build that they're looking for with the intensity that he brings. Damn well might be a full-time starter for them next year. We'll see if, more pass rush capability ramps up. He did have 29 pressures, 3 sacks. He got in the backfield and did some stuff. So I don't want to rule out that he can't develop more efficiency as a pass rusher either. But yeah, depending on how many edge rushers they kind of go with in the draft, it's obviously assumed that they're going to end up with Abdul Carter. But yeah, very well might be a starter and someone to maybe keep on a breakout watch next year. But if nothing else, he is setting himself up to be one of the better kind of edge number 3 pieces in the league, as that kind of innings eater, if you will, where you put him out there on first and second down, and he's gonna blow stuff up and be a problem in the run game, if nothing else. But let's flip back and talk a little offense for Cleveland. The kind of stock check on Nick Chubb continues. Came into the year at an 89 rating, just kind of out of all due respect for how amazing of a running back he was when at full health. I wanted to leave that rating up there for him just until we could see what his recovery would be like. Was this going to be an Adrian Peterson type of recovery where he comes back and is a, top back in the league again? Unfortunately, I would say it landed on the side of like kind of worst case scenario for Nick Chubb. On a positive note, he was at least able to kind of stay mostly healthy, but I do think that burst that he once had, a player that really in his prime had excellent acceleration into the hole, good breakaway speed, good shiftiness as well, like quick feet, is pretty much all gone. I mean, you're talking about watching a back that really felt like he was trudging through quicksand on most of his carries. So he still has vision. He could still fight for tough yardage. Nick Chubb is still in there, but he's trying to persevere through the body that he's stuck playing in right now. And it's just kind of sad to watch, honestly. It's uncomfortable even talking about because injuries just suck that much. But yeah, Chubb probably going to have to either accept a pay cut or see his release here in Cleveland. Praying to the football gods that another full offseason to recover, he can bounce back, but that certainly feels unlikely at this point. Jerome Ford, gonna give him a little bit of love. I think especially in the second half of the year when Nick Chubb was seeing a lot of the kind of dirty work, and then Ford was brought in as more of a change of pace back. Look, you do see the explosiveness with Jerome Ford. I don't think he's a good running back. I don't think you want him as a starter, but as that sort of, again, spark plug, that cliche change of pace back, he is fast as hell. And kind of like what we said about Chase Brown, but to a much more exaggerated degree, because he doesn't have anything close to good vision, Jerome Ford. I think Chase Brown has legitimately improved his vision. But if Jerome Ford picks the right gap or correctly guesses the right gap and, breaks into the second level, he is good at forcing guys to miss because he's so fast when he's moving at that speed. He's got a stiff arm. He's got some speed. There is stuff to like about him. It's just he is a very streaky runner, but ended up, 565 yards on 104 attempts. Didn't fumble once. That's good too. 26 missed tackles forced. That's 1 out of 4 touches for him. So again, there is some explosiveness, some juice there, even if he has his deficiencies still. Jerry Jeudy definitely stood out in the second half of the season for the Browns. Was a little surprised he didn't end up my super stud. Really thought he was having a breakthrough. And then last 3 weeks of the season, good old Jerry Jeudy is back. He has 6 drops in the final 3 games of the year. It's like, man, he just couldn't see it through to the finish line, could he? I mean, that was always the thing with him in Denver. Why they got rid of him was just the streakiness with the ball skills, the drop at his frame. So you're still going to leave with some of those questions, but he really did have, I think, the best run of football that he's had in his career. Weeks 8 through 15 in just 5 games, compared to a lot of players that had 6 in that time frame. Cleveland had their bye. Jerry Jeudy led all receivers in receiving yards at 614 yards in 5 games. Just 1 drop in those 5 games as well. Again, he didn't finish strong. He didn't see it through, but did show an upside that it's been a long time that we felt that way about Jerry Jeudy. And now kind of with a clear runway with Amari Cooper gone, heading into next season, hopefully better quarterback play. He got that big contract coming into the year that, frankly, I questioned. I'm feeling a little bit better about that contract, at least for Cleveland. And he's still pretty young, by the way. He's only 25 years old. He'll be 26 next year. So while you wish he finished stronger, I think you feel pretty good about Jerry Jeudy as their one for where they're at heading into next season. Let's talk about the offensive line a little bit. Both these veterans are going to come down. I mean, Joel Bitonio is 32 years old. He's just losing more than he ever did. Not the mauler in the run game that he once was. You definitely feel that. I mean, I feel like you don't even need to grind the tape to feel it. Like, you just aren't feeling that awesome push from the interior of this offensive line between Bitonio and Teller that you used to get in 2020, 2021. So I do think it's fair to say, Bitonio, who's a complete Iron Man, he's like never missed a snap. Body maybe just breaking down a little bit. Could be someone they think about moving on from if they are shifting to more of a rebuild. Still a decent player, still pretty, has the technique down and still a pretty good anchor. Not going to get beat repeatedly as a pass protector, but you do see the pressure rates and everything really shooting up from where he was in his prime. So kind of just a stock check on Bitonio at 32 years old, -3. And then Wyatt Teller as well. He had that kind of superstar breakout back when those O-lines we were describing were so great. And then he's kind of just been an average guard for a couple years at this point. Like, we got to just kind of crank it down from that skyrocketing breakout that he had a couple years ago. He's also 30 years old. He's a fine pass protector. He was very much like middle of the pack in terms of pressures allowed, pass blocking efficiency, all that. But he will take his losses. But again, what I said about the run game with Bitonio, it applies for Teller as well. Like, he's not grading out well as a run blocker, and you just don't feel him being like a difference-making run blocker. The Browns used to be able to like weaponize him and get behind him and have these like incredible runs every week, and you just don't get that watching the Browns with Teller. So just kind of coming back down to earth for him as well. Curious what Browns fans think of that, if that's fair, or if it's more related to circumstances out of their control. Last offensive player I have a note on here before we talk about the defense a little more. David Njoku just didn't have a good year. I don't want to lower him, though, because he really just was battling through that ankle injury all year. I was so impressed by what he did the year before that. But is going to be a guy we have our eyes on next year. Just wasn't an efficient receiver and was nowhere near what he was the year before in terms of that dominant run after catch threat. But again, how much was that? He wasn't able to plant on that ankle and explode through tackle attempts and all that stuff. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on that next year. And then, let's talk about the defense. So Jawan Briggs, the rookie out of Cincinnati, and Sam Kamara, just a couple of low-level defensive tackles here that I think have made their case to be a part of this rotation and this rebuild. Jawan Briggs especially came on late, really made some good plays against the run. For a D-line that just doesn't have, other than Dalvin Tomlinson, they just don't really have a lot of beef. They have a lot of these, Sam Kamara himself, a little bit undersized. Mike Hall, a little more undersized. They don't really have, 315-pound guys that can two-gap a little bit. Jawan Briggs showed some interesting promise there. Looks like they're maybe going to be rewarded for going local out of Cincinnati with their day 3, late day 3 defensive tackle pick there. And then, Sam Kamara is an interesting guy, undersized, plays about 290, but, we had him all the way down there at a 59. Like, he definitely was more than that. Made some splash plays in the backfield, ended up carving out, a good role, getting 11, 15, up to 20 snaps a game as that kind of 4-eye, kind of, gap splitting type. Hey, week 18, though, they stuck him out there against Baltimore. Full-time starter, played 63 snaps. Best game of his career, man. He had 4 defensive stops, three pressures. For a team, looking for guys that are going to play hard and fight for snaps, I think both these guys, Briggs and Kamara, will be a part of that rotation next year. And then Devin Bush, hey, former first-round pick, Pittsburgh Steeler, finding maybe a home here in Cleveland. We'll see. I do love him as a backup to Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, because they could probably get him back for pretty cheap. Very similar idea. And JOK is unfortunately a guy that has missed a lot of time throughout the years. He's freaking amazing when he plays. Probably had his best film this year and only gets better. But, he's so reckless. He's a little bit of a lighter linebacker. So he's, bashing around Probably a guy that's going to miss some time. I like putting Devin Bush in there. It's the same idea where, okay, he's been asked to be a full middle linebacker and do the full package of linebacker stuff. Well, they have a role with JOK here where they'll play him a lot more weak side, kind of keep him off blocks a little bit, just fly to the flat, fly around, see ball, hit ball, use your speed, dip up and around blocks. It's worked for Devin Bush. He put up the best tape he has in his career. I doubt you bring him back and start him next to JOK because, again, it's just a redundant skill set. You need a little bit more size and ability to patrol the middle of the trenches a little bit more. That's why they like Jordan Hicks. But again, I would totally bring Devin Bush back as an easy backup for JOK, who again only played 8 games this year. Before we go to the secondary, I want to back up. I have a note on my guy Mike Hall, rookie out of Ohio State. Got back on the field. You know, he had an off-field situation. I think it was domestic violence or something like that. Forgive me. It wasn't a good look for Mike Hall, whatever it was. I'm going to play the optimist here and say, you know, it's in his past. He's focused on his professional career, and it's all going to be rainbows and butterflies moving forward. We'll see. As we know, it doesn't always work out that way, but he did show why the Browns spent a second-round pick on him very late in the season, and he showed something, too, that I talked about with him where he played at 280 pounds at Ohio State, but I always thought he was a better run defender than kind of the draft media gave him credit for. I thought his technique against the run, his ability to slip blocks with his quick feet and strong arms was underrated. And then you saw that he put on about 15 pounds in the pre-draft process, and that really got me excited, man. And I think his run defense tape was really quite good. It was tough to get through Browns games, so naturally when this was my guy in the draft, my eyes would gravitate towards number 51 when he would take the field. And especially the Bengals game, like week 15, I think. It was the last month of the season, a must-win game for the Bengals. You know, Mike Hall had a couple run stops. It was just like, all right, like he's still there. Like he's trying to push through this off-field drama. And you know, the pass rushing stuff didn't fully click quite yet. He ended up with 16 pressures and a sack on 162 pass rush snaps. So not bad by any stretch of the imagination. Just didn't really like burst onto the scene in that way. So I mean, the rating's not changing. This is obviously a guy who was higher on coming in. I think the 69 rating is fair for now. But just a guy that I'm really hoping, like, he's not even 22. Like, he's 21 and a half years old. So I'm just hoping getting on the field in the NFL, hopefully can put his off the field baggage behind him, focus on football, and really start to hit his upside. Again, this was a damn near top 50 pick for the Browns, a team that's entering a rebuild. This is a high-stakes type of deal here. So really excited to see what year 2 looks for him and if he can stay out of trouble. But let's talk about the secondary. It was not a good year for the secondary. I do think Denzel Ward continues to just be underrated and live up to his rating. I've got him as around a top 5 corner in the league. So I do want to shout him out. But, you know, with these 2 young corners that were really a promising young complement to Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, former first-round pick, and Martin Emerson, former third-round pick. These guys were just getting picked on, man. There's no way around it. You watch the Browns games, especially Martin Emerson. Teams would just find him, isolate him, go at him, and too grabby down the field. Just couldn't really trust his technique in the way that he did in his first season. I think he's really lost his confidence. And then with Greg Newsome, I mean, part of this is, it feels like he's always a little banged up. He only played 13 games this year, but in those 13 games, he gave up almost 500 yards, 4 touchdowns allowed, completion percentage when targeted of 67%. They're just bad numbers, man, for a guy that has all the traits, a former first-round pick that I thought the arrow was only pointing up on him. There was some trade talks surrounding him as well that were always kind of weird to me. If they were true, the Browns probably could have gotten a second or a third-round pick for him. At this point, as he approaches the end of that rookie deal, I don't know that he would even be worth that. They maybe regret saying no to some of these trades. He just did not have that bounce back, leap forward season that he really is capable of. In fact, it just went in the opposite direction. This was the worst year of his career. So I still think the talent's there. I'm not ready to quite give up on him yet, but definitely a discouraging season for Greg Newsome. But we know it's a very highly volatile season. I'm more worried about Emerson than I am about Newsome. But you do definitely have to ding Newsome down. Started the season at an 80, down to a 78 now after another -1 following what we did to him at midseason. One positive note, though, from the local kid, Ronnie Hickman out of Ohio State. I mean, definitely a player that should have been drafted, right? Falls out of the draft because he just is not an athlete. But you don't really have to be a great athlete to be a solid safety in the NFL. Ronnie Hickman is a heady player that loves to hit, good tackling technique, triggers at the right pace against the run. He's just a nice player. Probably not a full-time starter. If he is, he's one of those guys, it's like, he can hold down the fort, but probably want more of a playmaker, a guy with a little bit more range on the back end, all that stuff. But really a nice undrafted pickup for Cleveland, and gotta love the story of a undrafted hometown kid finding his way into the NFL. And then Dustin Hopkins, the kicker, just had a putrid season. Browns fans are probably excited to watch football next year without him on the team. Let's move on and talk about the Baltimore Ravens. With their super stud, it is time for me to eat some big fat crow on my draft takes on Roger Rosengarten. Now, when the Ravens took him, it was a bit of an eye-opener because it was like, dang, the Ravens like him? That means I'm probably going to be wrong because they develop players so well, and they have a really good eye for talent. In terms of Roger Rosengarten, I loved his technique. I loved his athleticism. I thought he was a reach in the second round because I thought he had legitimately abysmal play strength. His anchor was just terrible. Didn't really move anybody in the run game. He would stick on guys and run his feet, but they wouldn't really go anywhere. He didn't displace defensive linemen too much. And it's not that he's like got amazing play strength now in the NFL. I do think he's probably beefed up with the NFL weight. Not that Washington's got a bad weight room or anything like that, but for one way or another, he's just put on some functional play strength. But again, it's not like he's necessarily got this incredible anchor or is displacing guys in the run game so much. It's more just that it's not holding him back. And I undersold just how good his technique was and just how good of an athlete he was. They've done a really good job weaponizing him as a puller in their system where they're not, whether you're a center, a tackle, a guard, it's 300 pounds, 380 pounds, they don't care. They'll get you on the move and have you lead blocking for Derrick Henry and Lamar and these guys. They've done a good job at doing that with Rosengarten, which does tap into his athleticism really well. But even in just normal head-up blocks in the run game, he's really good at keeping leverage, running his feet, not letting guys get off of him. And even if he's not, again, driving guys 3 yards back and have those crazy noticeable blocks, he's taking care of his assignment, taking him out of the play and creating a lane for Derrick Henry to burst through or Lamar. And the run game side of things has just been really good with Rosengarten. And the pass blocking has been way more consistent than I thought it would be. I think first couple weeks you saw the anchor show up, but as the season went on, he just managed to clean that up. You just didn't feel him having these tragic losses, getting blown up like right into Lamar, like right away. And, down the stretch, he shut out TJ Watt. That was kind of the famous stat that was going around Twitter. But really settled in as one of, if not the best. I mean, Joe Alt, obviously, but he was up there in terms of the best rookie lineman in the league this year. It just was so much better than I thought he would be right away. And now he's only 23 years old. He's got time to put on play strength. Reminds me of kind of a young, like Zach Tom, David Bakhtiari. Not saying he's going to be quite that good, but those are guys that were later coming in, took a couple of extra off seasons to put on some more functional play strength. And obviously Tom, Bakhtiari, both Green Bay Packers, but both guys that cemented themselves as, top 5, top 10 tackles, more or less. So, I mean, the sky's the limit for Roger Rosengarten. I was wrong. Ravens freaking nailed it. They got one of the gems of the draft, and deservedly so, needs to be talked about as their super stud. The right side of that offensive line was a major question heading into the year, and Roger Rosengarten made it so they didn't have to really worry about that spot. Just another feather in the Ravens' cap in terms of why they're so good at this. But more love to go around with the offense. Lamar deserves another boost. Look, Lamar, after winning MVP last season, has gone up 7 ratings points this season. Obviously, likely to get another MVP this year. As of this recording, we haven't hit the awards show yet. But whether he wins it or not, I don't know how you can argue that Lamar got even better this year. I think he was more accurate. I think he was a better decision maker now in year 2 of Todd Monken's offense. I think he lightened, he lost weight in a good way and was faster and a more electric runner than he's been and a more elusive player in the pocket. This was now the second year where I think in more of a drop back passing game, he's proven like he has that Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady trait, that elite pocket presence to sense pressure, mitigate it, navigate the rush, find those open step-up lanes in the pocket to buy really infinite amount of time to complete passes when you're Lamar Jackson and you're slippery and you can't get your hands on him. There's so many games this year where it's like, dude, he's unstoppable. He's unconscious. And look, Mahomes is Mahomes and the playoff success and all that, but dude, between what Lamar did and what Josh Allen did, I think the biggest compliment I can give Lamar is like, and I know it's a sensitive conversation because all people want to talk about is rings and all that shit, but just watching the tape and how these guys are playing right now, there isn't much of a difference between the level of quarterbacking that Mahomes is bringing to the table, Lamar's bringing to the table, Josh Allen's bringing to the table. The gap between these guys has never been tighter, and that's just about, for me, it's about Lamar and Josh Allen catching up to Mahomes. And Mahomes not really doing too much to like raise the bar either. Let's be honest. Obviously, the team's success has been phenomenal, and it's tough to raise the bar from literally number one. Anyway, probably gonna get some people heated about that conversation. It's always fun, but at the end of the day, it's just trying to give Lamar his absolute credit. I haven't done the AFC East episode to see where Allen's rating is going to come in here, but it will be fun when all of the, cards settle here with the Studs and Duds series to see where all these quarterbacks' ratings stack up for me here with Lamar at a 95. I think off the top of my head, Mahomes is at a 96 currently, and I think we had Allen at a 93, so we'll see once I do his update where I end up putting him. But yeah, it's all closing in together. How insane is the AFC, man? But he had some guys stepping up too. Justice Hill was phenomenal, dude, as that scat back compliment to Derrick Henry. It's to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if they bring Justice Hill back to complement Derrick Henry again. We'll see how they feel about the health of Keaton Mitchell. But I do believe this was a contract year for Justice Hill. Might have some bidders in free agency with not just the receiving stuff where he was really special. He had some big-time plays in scramble drill where he would stay in a block and then slip out, and Lamar would find him for critical third down conversions, but explosive in the screen game. But he had some really good runs too. Like that last game of the year against the Bills, he had 50 rushing yards, and there were some plays where he's just putting his fucking head down and going to work. I'm like, all right, Justice Hill, you're not just a scat back. So a +3 on the season for Justice Hill and a respectable 77 rating, which is kind of pushing on the fringe of like RB2, and should he be a starter in the league? Zay Flowers, gonna get his flowers, had to do it, but just keeps climbing. Really a do-it-all presence for them. The way they tap into him in the run after catch, kind of screen game, early downs type of stuff, plus his ability to win in the short game, medium, intermediate game, and deep game. It's all really there. It's just a matter of how much does he continue to climb in terms of the ratings and stacking them up against other wide receivers. Right now after year 2, he's kind of in that Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle range where it's like, all right, are you one of the best number 2 receivers in the league, or can he kind of, he ended up finishing with 1,059 yards this year, for example, 4 touchdowns. Like, the dude's an absolute monster, but can he take that leap and be a little more? Can you be a true alpha, number 1 type of wide receiver, put up that mega 1,500 yard, 10 touchdown type of season, or are you just a tick below that? That'll be something we're keeping an eye on in year 3, but it's not a diss to who he is. It's tough for anybody at 5'9", 180 pounds to be that guy, because he's just going to have size and strength limitations at times. Really, the only guy his size that has reached that level is Tyreek Hill, and Flowers is fast, but he's not that fast. Maybe Antonio Brown. So it's not impossible for Zay Flowers to get there. It's just going to be tough. But he does have a nice running mate breaking through. Rashad Bateman, I thought was really nice. I mean, especially through the playoffs as Zay Flowers was hurt. I think Bateman is just, it's all about consistency for him and not dropping those big catches in big moments where he has kind of scattered throughout his career. His former first-round pick, he's got the size, he's a good route runner, he's got underrated speed, he's good after the catch. Look, the Ravens brought him back on kind of a interesting, cheaper 2-year deal, and right now, with how he's playing, kind of showing a little bit, some of those clutch genes that have been missing in him and in his game as a former first-rounder. He's a huge bargain for them on the second year of this deal. So I like what we're seeing from a Golden Gopher. Always cheering for those Minnesota Gophers to step it up in the league. And then how about Tylan Wallace? Been waiting on Tylan Wallace to get an opportunity, but he saw some big targets with Zay Flowers out. Most notably, he was the one on that attempt to tie the game late against Buffalo where Mark Andrews dropped the ball. He was the one with that big 27-yard reactionary play and scramble drill, but he ended up with 13 catches for 241 yards on the season, 0 drops, came down with 13 receptions on his 15 targets. I think year 4 for him, he started to show a little bit of that talent that I did think he had at Oklahoma State, and I think the Ravens should bring him back as a nice wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 if he's starting to settle in a little bit there. And then last player for the offense, talk about our Golden Gophers here. Daniel Falele slides into guard this year and holds his own. He had his ugly losses in pass protection. I don't know that that's ever going to be his game necessarily. Is the drop back game one-on-one. He's 7 inches taller than some of these athletic 6'1" defensive tackles. I don't know, maybe going against Justin Madubuike in practice every day helps him learn how to manage those guys a little bit better. But definitely took his losses there, but kind of like a poor man's version of what we saw with Mekhi Becton in Philadelphia. It's just like, dude, when you have that much mass on the move on the inside, you're going to create some push one way or another. So he was effective in the run game and probably going to be back as a guard. Like he certainly wasn't a disaster enough in pass protection that they're going to be in a rush to replace him. So he's a fun player, and I think we're still learning sort of what a 6'7", 6'8" upside at guard in the NFL can be. This is a very new idea. One of those sort of coaching rhetorics that has just never been tested in football is what happens if you put a 6'8" lineman on the inside. And we've seen like 5 teams try it this year and to more success than failures. So we'll continue to monitor that into next season. But let's flip over to the defense. Not all good for this defense. This wasn't the typical Ravens defense that we're used to. I think as you talk about the offseason, they definitely need more help with their pass rush. Kyle Van Noy, though, just keeps doing it, man. The ageless wonder follows up what was last year kind of an out-of-nowhere career year at 34 years old, does it again this year. He'll be 35 around the start of next season. Man, dude, 56 pressures, 14 sacks, was their best pass rusher this year. Very multiple in terms of defending the run, dropping into coverage. Just one of these guys is like kind of tough to know what to do with because we felt like through 5 different teams and a 10-year career, we knew who Kyle Van Noy is, but really just like continuing to improve his pass rush repertoire and putting up production that he's never done in his career. And like the league didn't know what to do with this either. The Ravens gave him a 2-year, $9 million contract after last season, and he follows up that performance. Now he's like a huge bargain for the Ravens next year, just a $5.8 million cap hit. So at least they have that working for them. Unfortunately, the rest of this kind of front 7 just didn't really give you what you were hoping for this year. They were really hoping, especially I think for a leap from David Ojabo. They obviously let Jadeveon Clowney, but Ojabo here in year 3 now has had multiple tough leg injuries and, kind of unplayable this year. Just 12 pressures on 194 pass rush snaps. He had 2 sacks on the season, one of which came like right out the gate week 1. It looked like things were going to hit. That was maybe his best game of the year was week 1 against Kansas City. And, he's going to be in kind of a shitter, get off the pot type of, fight for reps role next year. He was all but benched by the end of the year. Out the gate, he was playing 25, 30 snaps, 37 snaps week 3. By the end of the year, both playoff games. He played 9 snaps against Pittsburgh, 8 snaps against Buffalo. It's just has not worked for a guy that, had he not popped his Achilles or torn his ACL at his pro day, he would have been a top 15 pick. Hard to know if that's just, he was never going to work out, or if it is all the, he's lost his athletic juice and is just struggling to battle through these injuries. It's hard to say. It's tough to say, but it's got to be talked about. And unfortunately, it just has not been the pick the Ravens were counting on there for the former Michigan Wolverine. And then Trenton Simpson, he's fascinating too. We gave him a +3 in the first episode of Studs and Duds. Looked like he was shaping in year 2, kind of this athletic project mold of a linebacker stepping into Patrick Queen's shoes. I thought he made some plays in the first 6-7 weeks of the year. Things were looking good. And then as that pass defense really sputtered in the middle of the season, the Brett Coleman dubbed Legion of Room with the Baltimore Ravens, just that brutal 2-month sequence with their defense. They actually worked their way through that, end up better in the second half of the year, and made some changes in the secondary. But one of the underrated changes they made was Trenton Simpson was all but benched at the end of the season. And it wasn't something I noticed on film, but presumably just wasn't meshing with the communication. Like, this is all speculation, but clearly a smart coaching staff sat him down and the defense got better. You have to at least account for that. I don't think it was necessarily that he played and I saw the deficiencies, if you know what I'm saying. It's just they stopped playing him, and I'm going to kind of take their word for it that he was screwing something up. I'm not giving up on him. He's a super young, athletic linebacker, but there's definitely some red flags there. We'll see what happens in year 3. This is a position that, for so many of these guys, is a 3, 4, 5-year project type of deal. So we're not writing Trenton Simpson off by any stretch of the imagination. I will say, though, one of my ideas for him as a prospect was to kind of give him the Hassan Reddick path to convert to edge. The Ravens need edge help. It's something to think about if you're Baltimore, especially when you got a guy like Kyle Van Noy right there who's made that transition before. He used to be more of a off-ball style Belichickian linebacker. So, there's a mentor in the building to make that transition. It's a thought to think about for Baltimore. Let's talk about the secondary. There's a couple guys that really stepped up this year through the adversity of the middle of the year that was so bad for them. Nate Wiggins, the rookie, I thought had a really good rookie season. Any rookie corner for the most part, unless you're Sauce Gardner or Devon Witherspoon, you're going to have your rookie moments. You're going to have some games where you end up a little grabby here, get beat there. That happened with Nate Wiggins, but really a steady player as the year went on. I felt better and better about him. I loved him as a prospect, man. I thought he was a steal at pick 30. Hell of a pick for the Ravens. And, man, he was a godsend. He missed a little bit of time early, but once he got back out there, I'm not going to say he was a lockdown number 2 corner, but he was a really, just a certified number 2 corner. And was a tough guy to, complete passes against as the year went on. So +3 for Nate Wiggins. He's shaping up to be a really nice player. And then Marlon Humphrey really, I think, became an unsung hero for the Ravens and had something close to a career year. Not just the 6 interceptions, that's obviously great, but you pair that with his 10 pass breakups this year, he had a career year in terms of passes defended. Also got back to punching the ball out a little bit. That was, you go back 4 years ago, he had 9 forced fumbles, and he was like the next Peanut Tillman. Well, the next 3 years, he only had 2 total forced fumbles. So he pops 2 out this year. He also had a career low in yards allowed per reception, which, it's tough for him because they play him so much in the slot where there's so many reps where it's just almost uncoverable, or it's the opposite of that, where it's impossible to shut down guys from the slot defending two-way goes and all these easy access, easy outlet throws for these quarterbacks. So he's going to allow a decent amount of receptions, but his ability to snap on him, clean him up in a hurry was really impressive this year. And I really think after missing a lot of time over the last 3 years, getting beat a little bit more than he had earlier in his career, I think Marlon Humphrey threw his name back into the ring of top 3, top 5 corners in the NFL. It's been a few years since we talked about him like that. So he really had a good season that you don't hear too many people outside of maybe Ravens fans bringing that up. But of course, there were some guys that were brutal to watch this year. Brandon Stephens, it became a meme at the end of the year. Teams would just say, where's 21? Throw the ball to him because Wiggins is playing well. Humphrey's playing well. Find Brandon Stephens. He's going to find a way to screw it up. And more often than not, he did. I do want to take a victory lap on a lot of you Ravens fans. I mocked the Ravens corner a lot in my mock drafts last year. Said, look, Brandon Stephens is fine. I get he had some good production this year. The tape was never really that good. I do think he played with more confidence last year and was definitely better last year than he was this year. I'm not going to say I saw this coming. But there was plenty of times on tape where you're like, wow, if the quarterback looked that way, they would have had a completion. And that came back to bite them in this season where teams just said, hey, Brandon Stephens is not covering people. Let's just look at him and wait till he busts his coverage and start throwing the ball at him. So I don't know if he'll be back with Baltimore next year. They gave him the extension. Maybe they believe in his character to kind of get back to work and clean some of that stuff up. Maybe he's a guy that could convert to safety. I mean, he is a bigger corner. He does like to hit, so we'll see. He misses a lot of tackles too, though, so I don't know if that's an option. Either way, I don't think Baltimore can have him out there as other than like a dime back that's just in like a ball hawking role, because trying to shut guys down on the outside is just not going to happen for him. So a -2 for Brandon Stephens, just -3 on the year. Again, I wasn't that high on him coming into the year anyway, but he was even lower than expectations there. And then Marcus Williams, I did not expect this, man, especially with how things started in Baltimore. I mean, he burst onto the scene with, I'm just going to try to recall this. Didn't he have like 4 interceptions or like 5 interceptions in his first few games with Baltimore? It was like, oh my God, how did the league let the Ravens get Marcus Williams? And then he just like lost all of his powers. It's like the Monstars and Space Jam. Like, I don't know, man. He just was busting coverages, late to the ball, stiff hips, like couldn't turn and run with anybody. He was the key. As bad as Brandon Stephens was, Marcus Williams was the key culprit in the Legion of Room defense that we saw for Baltimore. So they completely bench him. He will almost certainly get cut here. And now it's just like, can he rediscover his powers? He's only 27, 28 years old, I think. Let's check that. He's 28. So, like, theoretically, the physical skills are still there, but just pretty wild what happened with him. He gets a -4, -5 on the season. Still a 79 rating for now, kind of alluding to the fact that, like, this was an incredibly steep fall off, and you got to think there's still some juice in the tank, but we'll see. And then, dude, credit to our Darius Washington at 5'8", 175 pounds. He steps right in to Marcus Williams' shoes and just dramatically outplays him and frankly saved this defense. Just the lack of busted coverages alone, being in the right place at the right time, but being a playmaker as well. Man, he gets his hand on 10 footballs this year, 2 picks, 8 pass breakups, which is a monster number for a safety. Did have some missed tackles, would you expect, because he's not the fastest guy and he's tiny, so it's like he's not arriving. I mean, he can arrive on time because he's really smart, but sometimes can be a half a step late because he's not the fastest guy and just doesn't have the range to wrap dudes up. So, he did miss 15% of his tackles. That's probably as good as you're going to get from a guy his size. That's still average for safeties. So, just a godsend, really. Was a hell of a player at TCU, played from the slot, just really smart player that has to rely on his mind because he's not fast and he's not big. But you imagine he's going to be starting there and could be there for a while. And then Justin Tucker. I don't even really have the energy at this point to comment on the off-field stuff. But whatever is going on there has clearly been getting in his head because this dude has just had the yips. It feels insulting to call Justin Tucker this dude because before this news, he was a Hall of Famer, and now it's like, I don't know, is this going to keep him out? But he missed 8 total kicks this year. Like, that's just not Justin Tucker. So he's got to come down from being, heading into the year, the highest rated kicker, down to a 78 now. and we'll just kind of have to wait and see like how the dust settles here in terms of if he's in Baltimore next year. And now on to the Pittsburgh Steelers, our fourth and final team here today. And for the super stud, honestly, between what we talked about with Rosengarten and our super stud for the Steelers here, Zach Frazier, we might be banging out my back-to-back worst draft takes of last year. Seriously. I was too low on Jaden Daniels. You could throw that in there. But between those three, we're going back-to-back with two of my worst takes with Zach Frazier, who I wasn't a fan of him in the second round. Not that I hated him, not that I said he would be a bust or was going to be terrible. I just didn't see a lot of traits and thought the whole wrestling background thing was overrated and thought he was fine. Thought everyone was kind of overrating him a little bit. Boy, was I wrong, because I'm not going to say he went full Creed Humphrey as a second-round center and just went through his first season and walked out like a top 3 to 5 center in the league. But boy, he wasn't too far off. I think top 10 already is pretty fair for Zach Frazier. The consistency of his run blocking is what stands out to me. And it was really that wrestling background, right? Like, he really does just get it. He gets in the mud, sticks his hands inside, keeps his pads low, drives his feet. He just has that natural feel for the run game and how to displace people in that phase of the game. And honestly, it's not just the run blocking, and that's what's maybe even more of a surprise to me. That's the area where I figured he would at least be capable as a run blocker because of that, kind of wrestling background. But the pass blocking was where I was underwhelmed by Zach Frazier coming out. I thought he did give up ground and gave up more pressures than I wanted to see for a guy that was as hyped up as he was. And he ends up third in the NFL in pass blocking efficiency, which is pressures per snap, fifth in total pressures allowed. So in a league where there's really not a lot of great centers, I mean, Zach Frazier is very quickly pushing for that. So he gets a +4 on the back half of this season. It's been a +11 on the season. I've had to eat crow on this, but I'm totally fine with it. I mean, I'm cool with the scrappy, tough wrestling background center proving me wrong, because as a former lineman myself, these are the guys I just enjoy, and it just kind of, I don't know, I just completely whiffed. I didn't see it when I watched him. My eyes tricked me, I suppose. So I'm just going to have to count my losses and move on. I'm pretty proud of my track record with offensive linemen, but this one and the Rosengarten one were definitely big misses for me. But let's talk about the rest of the Steelers. Sticking with the offensive side of the ball, Jaylen Warren, the running back, down year. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. He did deal with some injuries, so I want to be light on him. Just 1 ratings points taken away here, but his yards per attempt go from 5.2 to 4.2. He goes from 12, 15 plus yard runs last year down to 4 this year. The breakaway percentage, which is a metric PFF tracks for basically explosive runs, cut down in a third. And frankly, the run blocking from last year to this year, you put Frazier in, that was good. They had some other injuries. Like, it was kind of a push. So he just wasn't as dynamic, didn't really kind of bounce outside and have those impact runs in the way he did the year before. It got to the point, too, that I interacted with some Steelers fans that were getting kind of sick of Jaylen Warren. I don't know if that was a loud minority or not, but he is set to hit the market, and we'll see kind of how the league values him, because he was really exciting in 2023. I certainly hyped him up, and this being one of the best 1-2 punches in the league heading into this season. And Warren just didn't really hold up his end of the bargain on that. But let's talk about these wide receivers. Our guy, Calvin Austin. We gave a ton of praise to Austin in the first episode of Studs and Duds. I would say we saw a small continuation of his mini breakout this year. I still don't think he's someone you want to lean into as a number 2 wide receiver, but some of the explosive plays he made and some of the stuff he did as a punt returner too was really fun. But just an option down the field, man. He can absolutely clear over the top of safeties, and Arthur Smith did a good job of scheming him up. He's got good ball tracking. I always saw kind of a Brandon Cook style ceiling on him, and He did get derailed with injuries earlier in his career, but it's been a ton of fun to see him playing with more confidence, getting more targets, becoming a bigger part of the offense. And I think you look at that depth chart next year, a lot of people are trying to put someone like Egbuka into their lineup. That actually plays for me. You got Pickens, you got Austin as a deep threat and a gadget player, and then get a little bit more of a short to intermediate demon like Egbuka. Maybe that can be Roman Wilson, but got to think Calvin Austin has earned the right to at least compete for that starting wide receiver 3 job next year, and he'll be entering a contract year next year. Could be that extra little motivation to fully break out as kind of a Darnell Mooney-esque type of number 2 wide receiver. We'll keep an eye on that next year. And then Mike Williams, they brought in to step into that number 2 outside wide receiver spot. Made a couple plays for them, but more often than not was unreliable and just not really a full part of the offense. We obviously saw what happened with the Jets. Just been kind of a fall from grace type of season for Mike Williams after a couple of years where he was missing time for the Chargers, but when he played, he still looked like the old Mike Williams. Just kind of feels like the age, the injuries, bouncing from team to team at this point. It's just he's just kind of run off his course a little bit. Still think he can make plays. Still think he deserves to be, on a roster getting targets and stuff like that. But definitely not that high end number 2 that he once was. Going to continue to praise Darnell Washington, who saw a nice bump in our first episode of Studs and Duds for this season. He has just really settled in as a blocker, man. I can't imagine how much Arthur Smith must love this guy. Just an extension of the offensive line, but a guy that, he generally catches everything that's thrown his way. Not much of a route runner, or he's not this crazy mismatch piece that we saw as combine, and the idea of Darnell Washington, sneaking into your first round mocks and that kind of stuff. He's not really like a receiving weapon, but because he is such a blocking guru, teams can forget about him, and then you turn around and it's like, oh shit, that's right. There is that 6'7" half offensive tackle sneaking behind us. It's gonna catch the ball. And he is after the catch a monster. So just a really fun tight end too. He's been every bit worth that mid-round pick that the Steelers spent on him for what he brings to the table, especially in an Arthur Smith offense that's gonna live in 12 personnel a lot of the time. Then you got Mason McCormick, another rookie pick that I did love the Mason McCormick pick. He's had a nice rookie season. I think he's probably carved out his rollout as the right guard next year, next to Zach Frazier. This dude's an ass kicker. He has had a lot of inconsistent moments, especially in pass protection. So he's far from arrived, I would say. But given his kind of background as a dominant D1 AA player out of South Dakota State, kind of an ass kicker, a tough guy, tested well. Plenty of reason to believe that the Steelers, who are generally, they've had their ups and downs in recent years, but generally a program that you believe in their ability to develop offensive line talent, definitely someone that can emerge as a quality starter as we look forward. A lot of young guards have worse seasons than Mason McCormick had in there at right guard for them. And then Spencer Anderson was a 7th-round pick a couple years ago, a tackle out of Maryland, just kind of a draft and stash athlete type. And he had to step in, played a little bit of left, played a little bit of right. Actually had to start the season at left guard. Sayamalu wasn't out there for him. First couple games against Atlanta and Denver weren't great, but was starting all the way up to week 3. And then, his next 2 starts were week 3 against the Chargers, where really didn't allow any pressures, had an awesome game there. And then fast forward all the way to the wild card game, he had to step in at right guard and held up quite well against the Ravens interior. So, for a 7th-round pick in year 2, a guy with a tackle background, left-right flexibility, we're not overselling Spencer Anderson here, but could be a nice filler piece as your sort of swing tackle, swing guard type of guy. Deserves a shout out. A lot of year 2 7th-round picks would look a lot worse than Spencer Anderson did. But that's going to do it for the offense. Let's flip over and talk defense. We have a lot of defensive linemen, especially to talk about. Some good, but a lot of bad, frankly, as the pass rush kind of faded away as the season went on. Let's talk about Keanu Benton. I am going to give him a +1. Just kind of steady growth, I suppose. it was really more of just a continuation of his rookie season where it was more in flashes. I will say, like, I'm not concerned about him. Obviously, I'm giving him a +1 here, but I do think we were potentially hoping to see more of a leap from Benton as opposed to just a repeat of like a fun season, you know what I'm saying? Like, he still had some really impressive pass rush wins. I think he has his moments against the run. His pad level's still a little bit too high. He can get driven back and give up a little more ground against the run than you'd like. You know, you look at him in that first Baltimore game where, it was like Christmas Day, I think, where Derrick Henry just ran free. A lot of bad reps from Benton that day. You go to the snow game where their offensive line, the Browns' offensive line that struggled all year, just kicked the teeth in, oftentimes up the middle against someone like Keanu Benton. Like, there's just moments where given what he did at Wisconsin, you just want a little bit more as a run defender. So, he still ends up with 24 pressures, 3 sacks, kind of rotating time with Larry Ogunjobi. And when he wins, it's like super exciting. But I want to see that leap next year. And a big part of how that leap is going to come, I think, is the Steelers have to stop kidding themselves with Larry Ogunjobi. The age regression is just hitting an already kind of average player pretty hard here. But Ogunjobi was a problem. 5% pressure rate as a pass rusher, and he's already been a guy that's kind of that penetrating 3-tech type that is typically more of a better pass rusher than he is a run defender. But this was the lowest percentage of run stops he's had since his rookie year. He had a PFF run defense grade of 41.6. Like, that is in the red, horrible. Still played 550 snaps for this team. Reiterate the points about that Browns game, the 2 Ravens games. Like, Ogunjobi was a problem. Not to bash on the guy, but at 31 years old, I think it's time we start to hand the keys to Keanu Benton. Not that Benton didn't play; they played similar amounts of snaps, but I think Benton needs to take that jump up with his own play and kind of be in that full go, 3 technique, not kind of splitting first team reps with Larry Ogunjobi and this kind of stuff. Let's bounce out to the edge group. I'm sorry, Steelers fans, though I think the majority of Steelers fans will agree with this. TJ Watt's just got to come down. He just faded into nothingness in the last 5 weeks of the season. Was already kind of a quieter year for TJ Watt. He was 50th in pass rush win rate on the season, ends up 21st in pressures. Like, we had him rated up as a 97, like a defensive player of the year type of guy. Not that he can't bounce back and be that guy again, but, a guy that has always won really off of athleticism. He's dominated. He's won, defensive player of the year with that, obviously. But, if he's just losing a 1/10 of a step, this is, he's not a guy that typically wins with a ton of power to complement that. So if he's just losing a little bit of what's always worked for him, I can start to be a little bit concerned. I'm not going to fully bet against DJ Watt. Still got him at a 95. Like, let's not overreact and say I'm hating on him here. He's still an incredible run defender. He still has that, like, closer gene. He didn't really break it out when they needed it most down the stretch, but points in this season, even if he hadn't done anything all game, he might get 1 pressure, but that pressure is, he's saving his best move for last, and when he hits home, I mean, his consistency to strip the ball, force a fumble, end the game, it's still special. So let's stop short of hating on TJ Watt here, but it is worth noting that he just was not near the player he had been for 2-3 years straight. And I think he had to come down a couple. Preston Smith, talk about a guy getting older. Packers kind of part ways with him for a late day 3 pick mid-season. Still can use his length and strength to defend the run, but has become a virtually, just a non-factor as a pass rusher. Already a guy that wasn't super athletic and not super powerful either. So I think he's having a hard time kind of working his way through offensive tackles. I think Green Bay saw that. And Pittsburgh trotted him out there. He's a nice player for them to have because you got Watt, you got Highsmith, you got Herbig, you have rushers. They knew what they were getting in him, but we did still have him rated as a guy that was a little bit more of a presence as a pass rusher. he's going to finish this season between Green Bay and Pittsburgh with 17 pressures on 261 pass rush snaps. That is miles below the 10% pressure rate you look for in any sort of edge rusher that should realistically be out there for passing downs. So he had to come down. Alex Highsmith is going to come up, though. It was a bummer that he got hurt and missed some time because he really was putting up. I don't know if I want to throw the word all-pro around, maybe like second-team all-pro, but certainly, maybe he did end up making the Pro Bowl. I frankly don't look at the Pro Bowl because it's such a joke, but he was just on track for having a monster season. He ends up missing, about a third of the year. But I'm just going to be honest. Highsmith was the more impactful pass rusher off the edge in Pittsburgh this year. He has really evolved from a guy, and this is where I'm bummed that he missed so much time this year, because I can't say I've always said, but go back like a couple years to like the Steelers deep dive. I was talking about how the Steelers are going to pay him. It's going to be a huge contract. He's super underrated. At that point, it was like he might be the best number 2 edge rusher in the league, obviously playing opposite of TJ Watt, but more just saying like in a vacuum, he is a number 2 caliber player. I think with what he did last year, after I said that, and then what he was doing this year before missing some time, like he's putting up number 1 numbers and number 1 efficiency and just number 1 tape. Like he's got the finesse. He always has. Had a spin move. He's got the speed to bend. He's learned that kind of, rip move that TJ Watt's so good at. He's got all that, but he does have a lot of power to him too. For a lighter guy, he will get up and under you. He'll bull rush you. He plays the run with a lot of power. He's just a really special player. And I wouldn't be stunned like next year, 27 years old, if that torch is kind of passed to the point that we're saying, you know what? Alex Highsmith is just the better player than TJ Watt. I'm going to cut it short there. I understand. Steelers fans love them some TJ Watt, but I'm just telling you kind of what I saw on the tape watching the Steelers this year. Not that I have these guys rated as such, right? I still have a 10 ratings gap between Watt and Highsmith, so context always matters with this type of stuff. But let's talk about the next edge here in Pittsburgh, Nick Herbig, who's just like kind of carbon copy of someone like Alex Highsmith, mid-round draft pick, ton of athleticism, wins with finesse. We've had the same dialogue with Nick Herbig. It's just his opportunities are limited for him to kind of skyrocket, right? But the more reps he gets, the more kind of boxes he checks. And you couldn't have 2 better mentors than Watt and Highsmith to kind of learn at a similar-ish size profile how to win at the NFL level. And Herbig, in essentially a third of a season's worth of work, 227 pass rush snaps. To put that in context, TJ Watt had 600 as the starter. So about a third of a season of starting, essentially. He ends up with 27 pressures and 7 sacks. You can't just assume that populates out, but that is like crazy defensive player of the year type of efficiency. You'd be talking about 81 pressures and 21 sacks. That's I want to say Garrett and Hendrickson had 84 pressures and whatever amount of sacks they had. So like that's just the type of like efficiency that Nick Herbig is winning with. So you got to keep rewarding him for it, even if it's in small sample size. But he's in good hands with the 2 guys coaching him up, being with the Steelers and their legacy of pass rushers. And certainly the Steelers are damn lucky to have, I would just say, the most explosive number 3 edge off the bench option out there. It's like bringing in Aroldis Chapman, or I'll shout out one of my favorite twins, Juan Duran. Like you bring him in the 9th inning and people are like, Jesus, we got to deal with this now. It's a great luxury that the Steelers had. So giving him some love. Let's bounce back to the linebacker level. Patrick Queen, the signing in year 1 just didn't work out, frankly. You saw the Steelers' run defense, especially down the stretch as the weather got worse. Playoff games, big games against the Ravens and stuff. Like, man, their run defense was really bad. And the effort from Patrick Queen started to come into question. But this is a dude that like has never really been known for being an LB1 that's going to have elite diagnostics and, thump between the tackles. Baltimore found a good role with him, opposite of Roquan Smith, they happily let him go. And Pittsburgh was hoping that something had clicked for him. He frankly just went straight back to the guy he was before Roquan got there, which was a bit of a first-round bust. So we'll see if, year 2, it is a different system. So we'll see if, year 2, things can come along. He's probably going to be here because of what they paid him. I would imagine they might be able to get out of it if they really don't like him, but it was not a pretty season for Patrick Queen. Fortunately, though, they did find a rookie linebacker in Peyton Wilson, and I love what the Steelers do in this. So many different examples of this throughout the offense, the defense, the history of their smart franchise. They found a guy who's not a complete linebacker in Peyton Wilson, who basically he played a lot of edge. He did a lot of coverage stuff at NC State, but not a lot of true NFL style middle linebacker stuff from Peyton Wilson. So they didn't really ask him to do that too much. They had Patrick Queen out there for 3 downs. They had Landon Roberts. Shout out to Landon Roberts, by the way, just phenomenal run defender. He did the difficult thumping early down stuff as a full size, 8-year vet. And then they would bring in Peyton Wilson and let him do what he did in college. Run around, play man coverage, zone, his zone feels pretty good. They let him blitz, and they're going to try to coach him up the full linebacker position. I've talked about this, probably in Studs and Duds and throughout some podcasts throughout the year. I do have a podcast, by the way, the Fully Inflated Football Show. If you're not following, go check that out. But this idea of linebacker by committee, as it becomes more and more clear that linebacker is such a hard position to play in the NFL, I think the Steelers are really onto something here, where you just kind of get a couple of guys that are good at different stuff and you rotate them like you would your pass rushers. It did really work for the Steelers in large points of this season. And this conversation is capped off by the interception that Peyton Wilson had in that first Baltimore game. Big moment in that game. The Steelers won that game, kind of flips the game, flips the field, showing off the athleticism coming in there for the pick. So a nice +2 for Peyton Wilson in this limited role. Again, just kind of coverage and blitz responsibilities. And year 2 will be interesting to see if they ask more of him or if they just want to keep going with this kind of LB by committee approach. And then, unfortunately, in the secondary, Steelers are back to having problems here. We thought as well, they at least answered one of those spots with Joey Porter Jr., had such a good rookie season. I still believe in Joey Porter Jr., but when you watch these corners, a scouting note I make a lot is, does a guy, there's a line of grabbiness as a corner. Sometimes you tote the line and you kind of play with the line, you grab, but you get away with it more often than not. And then there are corners that they're just grabbing all the time. They're a constant penalty risk. They stop their feet. And if they're not getting penalized, they're getting burnt because they missed on trying to grab guys. That was Joey Porter this year. So Porter had a bad year in coverage. He gave up 653 yards in coverage, completion percentage when targeted of 67%. Those are abysmal numbers. Not truly devastating numbers, but abysmal. That's kind of replacement level numbers for a starting corner. But the kicker here is 17 penalties on Joey Porter. That's too many to follow up from, I think, 12 last year. So they got to get back in the lab with him, improve his technique. It's not that he has to stop grabbing entirely. Some of the game's best corners, Sauce Gardner, Shavarius Ward, they're smart about how they use their hands. But Joey Porter crossed the line this year, and he's in trouble heading into year 3. It just was not a good year. So he's at a -2 after year 2. And then, Cam Sutton, he was bad in Detroit a year ago, coming over from Pittsburgh, was really just getting cooked for Detroit. He contributed to them just saying, enough of this, we're going to go get 4 new corners here. And then he has the off-field situation, a domestic situation. Again, forgive me for not knowing all the details, but he gets a 9-game suspension. He missed at least the first half of this season, and he comes back and still burnt toast. Figured going back to Pittsburgh, maybe he'd be able to kind of pick right up where he left off before he went to Detroit, where I always thought he was a nice balanced player. Not so much this year. Just continued to prove that the Steelers need to find some answers in the secondary. We've been saying this for years, man. starting to become a little bit of an Achilles heel from this front office. And, you know, Dante Jackson had some picks this year, but he was getting picked on as well. So, like, this group, Porter will be out there, but other than that, like, they're basically starting fresh. Unless you think Beanie Bishop is, like, a certified starter, maybe you do. Yeah, there's your Steelers. It certainly is not all rainbows and butterflies for them. Not all bad either, though. But that's going to do it for our AFC North episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button on the way out if you haven't already. It really does help me out. Let me know in the comments down below if you think, you know, these were fair ratings adjustments or not. If you think I missed anybody, let me know. I believe we're going to do the AFC East next. Hopefully we'll have that out before the Super Bowl here. And then I'm going to be kind of balancing these with draft content. I don't know exactly the rate that they're going to come out, but I appreciate your guys' patience on the series. Appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you for the next video. Peace out.